Today, we're digging into one of the most unbelievable stories in all of history. Seriously. It's the story of a teenage girl, a peasant, who said God was speaking to her and then went on to command an entire army and totally change the fate of her country. This is the story of Joan of Arc.
And that's the big question, right? I mean, how on earth did this happen? We're talking about a time ruled by powerful kings and knights. So how can an illiterate girl from some tiny village just step up and lead an army? How did she manage to completely turn the 100 Years' War on its head? Well, let's get into it.
So, our story doesn't start on some grand battlefield. Nope. It begins in a quiet little village where a completely impossible mission was about to be born. Okay, let's paint a picture here. It's the early 15th century, and France is an absolute mess. It's getting hammered in this long, brutal war with England, the 100 Years' War. And into this total chaos, Joan is born. She is about as far from a national hero as you can possibly get. A peasant girl, couldn't read or write, no social standing, and definitely no military experience. Then, when she's about 13 years old, everything changes. Joan starts claiming that she's hearing voices, the voices of saints, and seeing these incredible visions. And they're giving her a mission, an absolutely insane mission. She has to save France, drive the English out, and make sure the rightful king gets his crown. I mean, can you imagine? It's a heavenly command for an impossible job.
And here's the crazy part. Somehow, she actually convinces the French court to give her a chance. And that takes us to the most famous part of her story, her transformation from peasant girl to military icon. 9 days. Just let that sink in for a second. The city of Orléans had been under siege by the English for months. Everyone thought it was about to fall. The French army was beaten down, totally demoralized. And then Joan shows up. She's not some brilliant strategist. She's a symbol. She's a walking, talking symbol of divine hope. Her absolute conviction just lit a fire under the troops. Their fear? Gone. And in just 9 days, the siege is broken. It was this stunning, almost unbelievable victory that sent shockwaves across France. So, how in the world did she pull it off? Well, her path was actually pretty methodical. First, she had to convince a very skeptical French court that her mission was for real. Then, with their blessing, she takes that divine authority and uses it to inspire this broken army at Orléans. That incredible victory flips the entire war on its head and lets her achieve her final goal, getting Charles VII to his coronation and making him the legitimate, undeniable king.
But you know, her wild success, it created a whole new kind of problem. It turns out a peasant girl who says she answers only to God can be a real threat to the people who are used to being in charge here on Earth. And this is where you really see the clash. For Joan, this was simple. It was a spiritual crusade. God told her what to do, and she was doing it for the glory of France. But for the king she just put on the throne and his court, it was all about politics. They were actually getting scared of her influence, of how much the people and the army loved her. She was becoming a threat to their power. And all that fear and jealousy, it leads directly to her betrayal. She gets captured in battle, sold to the English, and then handed over to a church court that was completely on England's side. Let's be clear, this was never about justice. The whole point was to discredit her, to prove her visions were fake, and in doing so, to make the king she crowned look illegitimate. But even facing death, getting grilled for months by these expert theologians, Joan just would not break. This quote, it perfectly sums up her spirit. She was so sure, so convinced she was doing God's work, and it gave her this incredible courage that just baffled and infuriated her accusers. The charges they finally came up with were kind of a mess. A mix of spiritual and political attacks. Of course, they accused her of heresy and witchcraft, but they also got her for defying the church, basically for saying she answered to God directly. And get this, one of the main charges was for wearing men's clothing, which was against church rules, sure, but it really shows you how desperate they were to find something to stick on her. In the end, the verdict was never in doubt. The trial was a sham from the start. Joan of Arc was found guilty. In 1431, in a marketplace in Rouen, she was burned at the stake. She was just 19 years old. A truly tragic end for the girl who had saved an entire nation. But her story does not end there in the fire. In fact, in one of history's greatest ever comebacks,
Her execution was really just the beginning of her immortality.
It took a long, long time, but her name was eventually cleared, and then some. Just 25 years after she was killed, the Pope himself ordered a new trial, which completely overturned her conviction. And then, in this amazing twist, the very same institution that had condemned her to death as a heretic eventually beatified her, and then, in 1920, made her a saint. The heretic became Saint Joan.
So that leaves us with this final massive question. What do we make of her? She was a saint, a warrior, a visionary. She was a military leader who never actually killed anyone, a condemned heretic who is now a revered saint. So who was the real Joan of Arc? Was she a genuine messenger from God? A military genius ahead of her time? Or maybe just an incredibly brave young woman who dared to believe in something impossible? Maybe the real answer is that she was all of those things. And that's exactly why her story is still so powerful, all these centuries later.